Hey everybody, this is Felix from InventBox, where the solution is right around the corner. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about something called Pulse Width Modulation, or PWM for short. So why should you care about PWM? Well, it's used for controlling intensity, like brightness of LEDs or speed and position of motors, etc. So it's extremely useful. And basically, what it does is it gives us a way to create a sort of analog signal using digital pins that can only be low or high. Basically, PWM has a certain pulse or a certain width of time that in between pulses. So you see we've got a pulse here, and then the next pulse starts, and the next pulse starts. And so the time between the beginning of one pulse to the next is the total time for that iteration. And then the amount of time, the proportion of time where your pin is high compared to the whole time is called the duty cycle. A 25% duty cycle means that it's on 25% of the whole duration. And then 80% duty cycle means it's on for 80% of that time. So then a 0% duty cycle would be always off, always low, and then 100% duty cycle, always on. So by varying the pulse width, we can have a sort of analog-y way of representing information as we send it to devices. So for example, a 25% duty cycle would mean an LED might be on at 25% brightness or 80% brightness. You could do with an 80% duty cycle. So that's basic overview of PWM. If you're curious to learn more, you can do some research on Google. There's plenty of good tutorials. Also, if you want to know about the specifics of how hardware PWM works, I have a FPGA tutorial about how to build PWM from scratch using logic gates. But for Arduino, they've already done all the heavy lifting, of course, and so it's actually really easy to use PWM with Arduino. First, we need to be able to identify which pins can be used for PWM, because not all of them can be. Luckily, they've labeled it for us, and it says if it has a little tilde, it has PWM. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pins that we can use for PWM. Once we know that, we can start writing a program to take advantage of that. Let's write something that will make an LED fade on and off. So we'll start out just with an LED, and we'll hook it up to pin 11 because that's one of our PWM pins. And then we also are going to need the brightness. We have to keep track of that. We need to initialize our LED pin as an output. And then now we can start controlling the brightness. The way that we send a PWM signal is through the analog write command. And you give it the pin, and then you give it a value from 0 to 255. 0 is the lowest, 255 is the max. And so that, of course, corresponds to the duty cycle. A 0 would be a 0% duty cycle, and 255 would be a 100% duty cycle. So let's say you wanted to have it on for 25% duty cycle. Well, you could say 25% times the 255 max that it can be, and so it would be about 64. So we could put that in here. If we put 64, that would be roughly 25% brightness. Okay, let's put this into a loop so that we can have it gradually change the brightness of the LED. We'll do that with a while loop, and we'll say, while the brightness is not full, then we will analog write the brightness to our LED, and then we want to increase the brightness by 1 for the next loop. And we need to give it a little bit of a delay so it doesn't run too fast and blink so fast that we don't actually see it. And then let's do a very similar loop that does the opposite. We want to take it from 255 brightness to 0 again. And so this is, we'll just subtract 1 each time until brightness hits 0. And then, of course, it'll continue and loop back to the beginning. So it should just fade on and off gradually. Let's take a look at the circuit that I have set up real quick. All we have is an LED hooked up to a 220 ohm resistor going into, the ground side goes into ground, and then the positive side is going into pin 11, which is one of our PWM pins. We'll go ahead and run this guy. And you'll see here, the LED is most definitely fading on and then fading out. Other things that you can use this for would be color mixing. If you have an RGB LED, you could control servo motors, brushless motors. PWM signals are great for kind of mimicking an analog signal using digital pins. If you have any questions about this, please let me know in the comments. I'll get back to you. And stick around for the next tutorial where we will talk more about analog reading.